It's Monday, the 10th of July, 2023. Welcome to the Fast Five by Fear and Greed, where we give you the top 5 business stories you need to know in just 5 minutes. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, 5 stories, 5 minutes. Let's jump into story number 1 because it's a big week for Australia in international politics, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese travelling to Lithuania for the NATO summit. And at the same time, you've got Trade Minister Don Farrell making a dash to Brussels in an effort to save the flagging European Union-Australia free trade deal.
Yeah, so the war in Ukraine, which is now more than 500 days old, will rank highly among the issues on the agenda at the NATO summit. And yesterday, Education Minister Jason Clare said that the Prime Minister has been very clear that there is more support for Ukraine from Australia to come. Mr Albanese will meet with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin tonight before attending the NATO Leaders Summit in Vilnius from tomorrow. Albanese said it's important that he attend the NATO Leaders Summit, saying it's firmly in Australia's national interest as we work together towards a peaceful and stable world.
And it seems, Sean, that NATO's push into the Indo-Pacific region will also be a topic of discussion.
Definitely. No, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, and the Indo-Pacific is a long way from the Atlantic. NATO wants to open a liaison office in Tokyo. It's invited Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea to the meeting this week. That's, of course, about rebuffing China. Not everyone at NATO is happy. French President Emmanuel Macron opposes opening the Tokyo office. I mean, it would be a long way from the Atlantic. Former Prime Minister Paul Keating tends to agree. In his typical style, he said the region welcoming NATO would be a case of Asia welcoming the plague upon itself, given hundreds of years of intra-European conflict and US militarism.
All right, so that's NATO. What's Trade Minister Don Farrell doing in Brussels?
Well, apparently he cut short his overseas holiday over the weekend and travelled to Belgium in an attempt to break a deadlock over the free trade agreement. He said negotiations will continue for the rest of this year. He wants to close the deal. It's important because the EU is Australia's 4th largest trade partner, accounting for about $90 billion worth of trade. That's about 8% of our total trade, Michael.
Sean, one of the things that Belgium is famous for is its chocolate. And this is a terribly kind of forced segue into story number 2 because there is a crisis coming in the chocolate world.
There is. The price of cocoa, the main ingredient for chocolate, has hit a 12-year high as heavy rains across West Africa accelerate the spread of a rot-causing disease. So farmers in Ivory Coast, Ghana and Nigeria have reported signs of black pod disease, which, not really surprising, black pod disease causes cocoa pods to turn black and rot. Cocoa prices are now more than 40% above where they were a year ago. The global price of sugar is also at its highest level in 12 years. Chocolate pricing is surprisingly elastic. It means a change in price impacts consumption. Research by the Bureau of Statistics earlier in the year, reported in the Financial Review, says that a 1% increase in chocolate prices causes a 7% drop in consumption. They certainly didn't survey my house, and I suspect not yours either, Michael.
No, and Belgian chocolate, was it those shells? Do you remember the shells?
Yeah, overrated.
Oh, okay, that's a very firm, decisive decision from Sean Aylmer today. On to story number 3. 3/4 of homes listed for auction last week sold as clearance rates remain high. This is on the back of low levels of listings, though.
The number of listings last week dropped more than 8% and were 13% lower than a year ago, probably due to school holidays and higher interest rates. But anecdotally, at least, prices are pretty good. Overall, the preliminary clearance rate across capital cities jumped 4.2 percentage points to 74.5% from about 1,400 auctions. Sydney was at 75.6%, Melbourne at 72.8%. Of course, the Reserve Bank refrained from lifting interest rates last week, but most market watchers expect more rate hikes to come. Something to keep in mind, research group Roy Morgan has found that the number of Australians already struggling to make home loan repayments has jumped by 627,000 to about 1.43 million borrowers. Another rate rise would add 51,000 home loan borrowers to that list.
That is pretty frightening. Story number 4, Sean. 52% of Australians say they will vote yes to alter the Constitution to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament later this year, while 33% say they will vote no, and 15% are not sure.
And migrants and younger Australians are more likely to vote yes in the upcoming referendum, according to the Australian Institute. 73% of 18 to 29-year-olds say they'll vote yes, while among the 50 to 59-year-old cohort, 40 says yes, 40 says no. More than half of Australians aged over 60, 51%, say they'll vote no.
Final story, Sean. Story number 5. I know you have always had a deep interest in shoes, L Catterton, the private equity firm backed by luxury French fashion house LVMH, is considering strategic options for Birkenstock, the shoe brand, including an initial public offering.
I bought my first pair of Birkenstocks. In fact, Jackie bought them for me only in the last couple of months. Very comfy, Michael. The iconic German sandal maker could be valued at more than 9 billion Aussie dollars in an IPO. Incredible. The transaction will come more than 2 years after the private equity firm and the family investment company of billionaire Bernard Arnault acquired a majority stake in Birkenstock, valuing it at about 5 billion US dollars. What's that, about 8 Aussie? Brothers Christian and Alex Birkenstock still hold a stake in the firm.
All right, there we go. The top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 10th of July, 2023. Remember to hit follow on the podcast. And if 5 minutes isn't enough for you, you can find our longer daily show called Fear and Greed, wherever you listen to podcasts. And that comes with a bunch of interviews. Today's interview is a great one for investors. In particular, we are getting some fascinating insights into Apple and Tesla. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fast Five by Fear and Greed. Have a great day.